Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to continue talking about this really interesting article called Face Off on the Grand Chessboard, and it's in the Asia Times. And so we only got like a fraction of the way through last time, and it was already over 15 minutes. I said, okay, we have to have a part two to this because I'm really getting into it. It's really talking about a lot of topics that I know a lot about and I feel are imperative that I cover with you. And so I chopped this video up and said, let's continue where we left off. You don't have to have watched the first video to understand what we're talking about here. We're really just talking about the American competition with China, the trade war that's going on. We talked a little bit last time about the win-win cooperation, how that's a tool in the toolbox of China that the United States doesn't have, and how China fully recognized after these past administrations, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, that no matter what happens, things are going to continue to escalate in terms of their hostilities towards China because the United States is controlled by Zionist oligarchs. So the article goes on to say it became a zero-sum game on the Grand Chessboard, as this Polish named person says in his famous book. And so when they talk about zero-sum game, it's that there's only a finite amount of resources, and so someone has to win and someone else has to lose. And that's what I talked about as well, where the United States just doesn't have that kind of abundance mentality where win-win cooperation can happen. They have to win at someone else's expense or no one's allowed to win. So it goes on to say, based on game theory and a ruthless winner-takes-all approach, think tanks across the West divide ever stronger decoupling measures and punitive sanctions on a rapidly expanding entities list. And so this is why the rest of the world is becoming very averse to the United States and to the West, is because of the fact that more and more companies, more and more nations are getting sanctions by the United States. And they're like, well, wait a minute, it's only a matter of time before the United States wants to bully us and we become sanctioned as well. And so I would recommend, just first of all, that you learn a little something about game theory. There's a ton of free online courses on game theory online. And I think it's worth understanding how game theory works because it can really help you break down and figure out how things could potentially function in various scenarios. So that's something to understand. But people are recognizing that the United States is not a trustworthy partner. The United States is not someone they can work with in the long term. I think even countries like Saudi Arabia are recognizing that because they've been pivoting towards BRICS and they've been pivoting to not using the dollar for trade of oil. So anyways, the article goes on. It was supposed to be a checkmate move when the United States sanctioned a ton of countries. So the article says, if the controls are successful, they could handicap China for a generation. If they fail, they may backfire spectacularly, hastening the very future the United States is trying desperately to avoid. So the sanctions did absolutely fail, and it did hasten the end of the United States. We are at least a decade ahead of schedule for what my predictions were. And it's because the United States just underestimated China and Russia and what they were capable of. So China has to figure out how do they fight a zero-sum game, and they're doing it with Chinese math, this article says. In the Chinese martial arts, one keeps a reserve strength of at least 70% of the back foot, displaying on 30% of one's true strength and punching the opponent. The remaining 70% are reserved to be drawn on as the attacks intensify. The depths of the reserve often catches the opponent by surprise. So what they're saying here is that China is holding back and being very cautious in how they react to the United States, and they're keeping a lot in reserve for when the inevitable conflict does happen. Okay. And China, it says, is going for broke in this article. So seeing how the game was playing out on the Grand Chessboard after 2008, China imperceptibly began to switch the game from chess to YQ. I don't know how to pronounce that. The game of encirclement. Oh, otherwise known as Go. Okay. I know Go. In their book, 1,000 Plateaus, Gilead Deleuze and Felix Guattari offered a succinct explication of the differences between two games. They noted that in chess, the conflict is institutionalized and regulated with a front and a rear battle line, whereas in Go, there are no battle lines. There's a question of arraying oneself in an open space. They note of holding space, of maintaining the possibility of springing up at any point. This is an excellent point that I've never seen made and I've never made myself, which is that United States functions across a battle line and they have multiple maybe theaters of war, but it's really rigid and, like this says, institutionalized. And China understands that they can win some battles, lose some battles. They can pull back in certain areas, push forward in other areas, and they can really make a more fluid and dynamic battlefield when you're talking about playing Go versus playing chess. And I really like this comparison because it really does show that China has taken some losses in order to get some wins elsewhere. And that's something that it happens in chess, but it's more prominent in Go. And China is very clearly playing Go while the United States is playing chess here. And that mentality difference is what's causing the United States to lose really on all fronts, because they get bogged down and they don't know how to stop that. They don't know how to come back from that. Like, take the Ukraine conflict for a second, which is that the United States is investing a ton in Ukraine, and Ukraine obviously doesn't really matter overly much. Sure, it's the breadbasket of Europe, but in the grand scheme of things, you're not actually toppling Russia at this point. Russia's clearly winning. And the United States just doesn't have that reverse gear. They're not able to turn around whenever they make a problem like what's happening in Russia. And they're also not able to turn around like what's happening in Israel and Palestine. Although for that, it's because of the fact that they are Zionist controlled. But anyways, the chess first Go example is excellent example. I'd suggest you consider that deeply. Chess versus Go. And if you don't know about Go or you don't know about chess, please look into those two games, because that really does show you the difference between how the West thinks and how China thinks. So it says, in contrast, chess is played in a structured space with each piece assigned a specific role in the hierarchy, with a clear differentiation between the pawns and the lead pieces, such as knights, bishops, kings, and queens, each moving its designated way. In contrast, Go is played in a fluid space where the pieces are identical and their roles are ambiguous. It is a strategic context that matters. The strategic orchestration of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There are many moves in Go as atoms in the observable universe, offering infinite flexibility and maneuverability room to an astute player. The ambiguousness and fluidity of their roles augment the potential importance of every piece on the board, bewildering those who do not understand the Go game. China plays Go by radically expanding its playing field and its global political economic space. China's mobilization began in earnest across the whole board. And you can see this based on how China really took on the mantle of being the top trade country. And I think there's something like 150, 160 different types of trade goods. And China became first in all those different types of trade goods. They're the only country that is, well, I don't want to say they took first. They're the only country that is able to trade in all those different types of trade goods. They're the ones that are really broadly successful, and they made sure that they're able to have something to trade with pretty much every nation in the world. And so that's why when you see a map of, like, say, the early 2000s versus modern times, China is a bigger trade partner than the United States for nearly every country in the world at this point, because China is playing a very flexible game in terms of they just want to have that engagement. They want to foster those win-win situations because they understand that strengthening other countries, no matter what country it is actually a detriment to the United States. And even the United States allies, the United States can't have become too strong. Look at what they did with Japan and the Plaza Accords. Look at what they did with Germany and the Nord Stream pipeline bombing. The United States just does not allow any strong other countries, even if it's allies, even if it's puppets. So the article goes on to say there's a misreading of China. It is a fatal mistake to view China as a sea of identical faces. Every Chinese person is in fact a monad, an individual microcosm, a bundle of energy. Okay, we could skip that. Okay. Well, let's see. What does this say? Okay, so, this is interesting. In terms of infrastructure security, from healthcare to education, Chinese people place high demands on their government to deliver, but when the call comes to mobilize in the face of an outside threat, the role is reversed. Okay, so it's kind of like the JFK thing. Instead of what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. So apparently the Chinese embody that. I'm learning a little bit from this article as well. So it says, the country needs you was the message once the trade war really started with the United States. Under the mortal threat of the tech war, 1 billion people sprang into action. It wasn't just a directive from Beijing and planning by top players like Huawei. Students voluntarily switched their graduate studies from other sciences to information and communication technology. Rival companies set aside differences to cooperate. That actually gives me goosebumps to see that people are willing to do that. Because in the West is propagandized to be individualistic, so the Zionist collectivist can outcompete the much larger individualistic West. And so that's why the Zionists are in control despite being such a small group. And seeing people work as a collective, as a cohesive whole like this, and switching their majors and working together as these different companies in order to outcompete the West, it's really cool to see like that type of thing happening. In the West, it's like everyone is just going to college for feminist dance theory, whereas in China, they're willing to switch from one science and technology field to another in order to advance the nation state, in order to advance their civilization. And you just would never see something like that in the West. And it's China working to the competitive advantages of its model of a harmonious society, a collectivistic society, whilst the United States just couldn't do something similar to that. So the article goes on to say, tech war in a multipolar world, a turbo chain reaction propagated across the people space from R&D to a complete ICT supply chain, not only in these various areas, but each taking on specific challenges within the microcosm. So you have all these different places and organizations and people working together to defeat American sanctions, and there's no American response that is really possible. So the article goes on to say, would all this working together have happened without an all-out tech war against China? And the answer is no. And so they're working as one cohesive, symbiotic entity, and it's really cool to see. China had always viewed chips as ordinary electronic products, and as long as they could rely on a steady supply, there'd be little interest in reinventing the wheel. Huawei had a huge reserve of strength and could have punched sooner, 10 plus years sooner for a number of technologies. Okay, so I warned China about this over a decade ago, back in like 2010-ish, that you need to care about the supply chain because the United States is going to cut off semiconductors. And it seemed like they didn't really understand that. They didn't think that would actually happen because they got too cautious. And maybe it was a matter of it's hard to react to something whenever you don't actually see the threat. It hasn't materialized. But yeah, that's what happened. Huawei could have done a lot to better secure itself. China could have done a lot to get access to domestic semiconductor chips, but they just didn't because the threat wasn't realized yet. Okay, so the high-tech tech war, though, has really changed everything for China and made them work as more of a cohesive whole. This difference is a key to understanding the outcome of this high-tech tech war. The issue is not merely Huawei's Mate 60 Pro smartphone, but rather that China is creating an entirely perfectly networked universe of which only the tip is visible. The chessboard has morphed into today's Go game, with 70% of the world on joining China in the firm BRICS and the angiogenic growth of BRI investments, both physical and virtual. Huawei's chief financial officer during September 2022 Huawei Connect 2023 conference, protocols are being negotiated in global nexus and next wave technology with customized security and decentralized control is being stitched together. Okay, so we're now wrapping up the article. This sets the stage for full spectrum of AI-aided products and services for consumers, but more importantly for businesses. So 2C means consumer to consumer, 2B means business to business, industries, agriculture, and infrastructure all plugged into the same backbone. The very formation of a complete Chinese semiconductor supply chain nearly from scratch demonstrates how the backbone described by Huawei is already working. Who else would be able to mobilize so swiftly to create a competitive global 6G nexus? And China hasn't even begun to fight back. So that's the thing where China is being as cautious as possible because it knows the United States is making mistakes and it's in terminal decline. And so China is just trying to hold the line and make sure that Russia, Iran, all these countries don't get roped into a war because they end up winning the longer this goes on. The United States cannot hold on to its power in any way, shape, or form at this point. It's obvious it's a house of cards that is slowly falling, and they're just waiting for the point where it falls much faster. And so China is not planning on fighting back unless it absolutely has to. And so that's the situation we find ourselves in. Very, very interesting. Let's wrap up this article. What does this paradigm shift mean for the Brzezinski's game theory? It means that the West must get out of its box and zero-sum thinking and join the new expanding multipolar world. Again, I've said this in other videos, but that's not going to happen because the United States is structured in such a way so its win conditions have to involve creating chaos throughout the world, exploiting the populace, extracting its resources, divide and conquer tactics, co-opting, etc., etc. So with its multiplicities, this multipolar world realizes three principles. The greatness of the ocean lies in its embracing hundreds of diverse rivers and streams into its generous, unfathomable, and perpetual vastness. All right, so this is a really interesting two-part video on this Asia Times article called Face Off on the Grand Chessboard. I really enjoyed providing commentary on this. Really got me to think of things in a couple of new ways, and I hope it helped you as well. If you found this video to be informative, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel for more content. Please leave us a comment in the comment box below. I read all of your questions, comments, concerns, critiques, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.